Netanyahu is heading up another meeting of his war cabinet. What we know from yesterday was that there appeared to be some divisions within that cabinet about how, when, and where to respond. The military said afterwards that they had drawn up plans to put before the war cabinet for consideration, and that they involved both offensive and defensive responses.
The world waits to see how Israel will respond to Iran's drone attack at the weekend, firing 350 missiles and drones towards Israel on Saturday night. The reports that the UAE and Saudi Arabia have passed on intelligence to help Israel. Israel's air defences and international support intercepted 99% of them, in part thanks to the involvement of British planes, as well as America and France. Well, the Foreign Secretary David Cameron says that Israel should think with its head as well as its heart as it considers how to respond. David Cameron spoke to Times Radio Breakfast.
In many ways, this is a double defeat for Iran. Not only was their attack an almost total failure, but also the rest of the world can now see what a malign influence they are in the region and understand their true nature. And so I think it is right for Israel not to escalate, but obviously they're a sovereign independent country and they'll make their own decision.
That was David Cameron speaking to Times Radio earlier. Well, let's get the very latest on the situation now. The Times World Affairs editor, Catherine Philp, joins us. Catherine, where are we now? 36 hours after the attack on Israel? What's the situation right now? Is Benjamin Netanyahu going to heed this plea from America and Britain to bank the win, as they say?
Well, firstly, let's see. I think that the fact that it took allies to help Israel see off that attack does give them a voice at the table. And whilst at the same time, David Cameron saying there that Israel does have the right to take its own sovereign decisions, it's very, very clear what I think the US and the UK would like it to do, which is lower the temperature. Right about now, Netanyahu is heading up another meeting of his war cabinet. What we know from yesterday was that there appeared to be some divisions within that cabinet about how, when, and where to respond. The military said afterwards that they had drawn up plans to put before the war cabinet for consideration, and that they involved both offensive and defensive responses. So there are a variety of ways this could go. I wouldn't expect to see anything happen soon. I think that certainly, there were indications yesterday that nothing in terms of an Israeli response is imminent. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
It's really interesting that, because one of the things we get lots of questions from listeners saying, why is Britain getting involved? Don't we learn our lesson about trying to interfere in other parts of the world? Really interesting way of looking at it. You're saying that the act of us essentially helping Israel shoot down these missiles, it doesn't seem as if we're particularly designed. They were more designed to show they could fire them rather than show whether they could hit with them. Us getting involved actually might give us slightly more purchase on Benjamin Netanyahu in terms of trying to dial things down.
Yes, absolutely. And that is one reason for getting involved. The other is that I do understand people wondering why on earth Britain is getting involved in this, but look at it from the point of view that this was a defensive action. Now, actually, most of the interceptions by non-Israeli forces were done by the Americans. What we did was the UK used the RAF jets it has that are in the region as on a mandate for actually fighting Islamic State, ISIS. So they used those jets to backfill other areas that the US were taking away missile defense from. So most of it was done, the heavy lifting was done by the US and Israel. And Britain sort of backfilled a bit on that. But yeah, so one, that's a defensive action. Now, that is very different to saying that you're going to follow Israel into any further action it takes. And we've had a pretty, I think, again, a clear message from the US and from David Cameron on behalf of the UK that Britain and America would not sanction getting involved in that at all. They are not interested in being part of any offensive action on Iran. So I think it's quite important to look at the action in those terms, and indeed the fact that having been part of that coalition, we can now use our voices to urge restraint on Israel's behalf.
And then, given that, if we're having this conversation this time last week, Catherine, it was all about Washington and London trying to put pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to dial things down in Gaza. The concern that the incredible bombardment of Gaza and trying to target Hamas since the October the 7th attacks had gone too far. It was no longer proportionate. That message was. Has this sort of recalibrated that relationship now? You've suddenly got Britain and America saying they're four square behind Israel. So what might be the impact then of what is happening in Gaza?
Well, I mean, I think you can say that what Iran has done is walk straight into a trap that Israel set, essentially, because Benjamin Netanyahu's always been much keener on Iran as an adversary than the Palestinians. When I lived in Jerusalem, he never wanted to talk about the Palestinian issue, only Iran. So in a sense, a conflict with Iran moves attention. I mean, look, what we're not talking about right now, we're not talking about the suffering in Gaza, the outbreak of famine, and that is how Netanyahu would prefer it. So I think that it was interesting the G7 leaders made sure they tack on a bit about Gaza in their statement yesterday, as if to say, we haven't forgotten about this. I mean, things were very icy, obviously, after the killing of those aid workers. And really, it was as much not just the bombardment, but the fact that, supplies were so difficult to get into Gaza and a man-made famine was coming about. So I don't think that's been forgotten. But yeah, the dialogue has changed and it's gone away from Gaza, and that's not good for the humanitarian crisis there at all.
Catherine, always good to speak to you. Times World Affairs editor, Catherine Philp.